Volume 7 C63. They reached the town before the sun set, but it was still late in the day before they made it through the open wooden gate. As security went, it was fairly pathetic. The wall was little more than cut logs sharpened to points at the top. The guards were well equipped, but few, and the height of the logs that formed the wall was such that anyone with martial arts could have cleared them in a single bound. But it was good enough against common bandits and most weaker monsters. The streets were unpaved, but the buildings ranged from stone to brick to wood, with a few homes that were taller than the walls themselves, denoting the wealthy members of the local township. The odor of horse and animals was thick and carried on the breeze, leading both Layali and Zeshi to cover their noses. Brain couldn't resist. "Smell that air," he laughed, and the pair groaned behind him as he led them to the nearest inn. The unpaved roads were more like wide paths along which people walked, and thanks to the lack of recent rain, at least it was packed hard and was easy enough to walk through. The people they saw were mostly dressed in cheap breeches of black or brown cloth with laced-up shirts, and those were carrying farming or fishing tools, and weapons enough to fend off any river creatures. Some carried axes or wood from the nearby forest, while others carried animal carcasses slung over their backs from a successful hunt. It could have been any town anywhere, and all Brain wanted to do was leave it. Just a short stay, he told himself as he opened the door to a building with a cheap wooden sign hanging overhead that had the crude outline of a mug and a bed flapping back and forth in the breeze. A portly innkeeper stood behind a table and shot to his feet to speak to them. He wore an apron around his substantial gut and a cheery smile on his chubby face. "Welcome to home sweet home," he said, and Brain approached the fellow with an equally false and measured good cheer. "Hi, my wife, daughter and I need a room for a while, maybe the night. Do you have space?" Brain asked, and the innkeeper's jowls flapped as he nodded up and down. Course we do. But what with folk passing through to go to our winter, the prices are a little higher now. And I can't compromise on them. Cost'll be 9 silver per person," the innkeeper said, and Brain sucked in his teeth. "Are you a bandit, or an innkeeper?" Brain asked with a frown, and the innkeeper's cheery demeanor vanished. "The price is what it is, bandit or no bandit," the rotund man answered back, and Brain gave a look over his shoulder at Layali's leg. "I need to rewrap that, I need more herbs. I need to get horses. And a new sword. At least the monster meant we're okay on food for now." "Fuck." Brain mentally cursed and then gave a slow nod. "Fine, show them to the room, I'll have to go. Sell a few things." "Where can I do that?" "I'll pay you when I get back," Brain promised, and the innkeeper thought that over for a moment. "Round the corner there's a store, mostly sells gear to travelers and whatnot, but they buy most things if they think they can resell it," the innkeeper promised and moved out from behind his table. "Brain, what are you selling?" Zeshi asked, but he shrugged. "Just some things. Don't worry about it, just get Layali's bandages unwrapped, I'll be back soon," he promised with a reassuring wink. Fine," Zeshi muttered, and when the innkeeper walked past them, Zeshi followed to the room. The floor creaked under every step, and she felt Layali cling tighter while wrapped around Zeshi's body. The footfalls of the innkeeper bowed the cheap wooden steps each time, but they never gave way under his weight. She followed him to a crude, dark wooden door that had clearly seen better days. It was chipped and rotting in places, having never been sealed against the elements, and even beneath the doors as she could feel the draft caressing her feet and denoting the open window within. "Camping is nicer," she thought, but waited while the innkeeper unlocked the door with a rusty iron key and opened it to reveal the room within. It had only a single bed, a rough, unrefined table, a single chair, and no wardrobe or place for clothing. Its only amenity was a single smaller table on which a half-burned black and white candle sat with a pair of sparking stones. The innkeeper held the key up while Zeshi went within and placed Layali on the mattress. The bed creaked more beneath her, and the noise of straw rustling within revealed immediately what it was made of. "I'll be holding the key till your husband gets back. If he doesn't have the money, you leave or I'll call the guards," he said, and unsure of just what to do in this situation, Zeshi simply answered him. "I'll make sure he's successful." "Don't leave," Layali whispered from behind her and reached out to grab the cloth of Zeshi's dark shirt. "I don't want to be alone." The young half-elf bowed her head, and her tiny voice reached her taller counterpart, but Zeshi turned, took the small fingers that gripped her shirt, and removed them. She crouched down in front of the girl so that she was looking up into Layali's face. "It'll only be for a minute. The door will be locked so nobody can come in. Just be patient," she said and brushed the girl's golden hair aside. "Okay?" she asked. Layali gave a tiny little nod. The innkeeper, to his credit, waited until she went for the door, and true to her instructions, when they were both on the other side of it, he put the key in the lock and turned it with a click. "Just around the corner?" she asked when she reached the front door of the cheap establishment again. "Yeah, can't miss it. And hurry up. If you two abandon your kid here, she's an employee," he said, and she had no idea whether or not he was joking when she left the building or not, and was almost afraid to ask. "Is this really what I've been defending all this time?" she wondered, recalling the mockery and abuse of the mob when her half-elven heritage was seen, the public abuse of her own brother, and everything between and after. She felt a roiling sense of disgust in her guts when she rounded the corner and approached the store. At least the innkeeper had told the truth. It was there, the door was open, and she could even see Brain standing at the counter. "Spoons? Forks? Knives?" she asked herself as she saw him dump them onto the counter. Rather than follow her first instinct, to go in after and speak to him, she paused to listen, remaining behind the door. "Listen, these are all solid silver and solid gold. Check it, make a little cut, but only if you actually plan on buying, because if you mark them it'll be harder to sell elsewhere," Brain said while he stacked the utensils according to their type. "Yeah, and how'd you come by 'em?" a rat-faced skinny man with hard, beady dark eyes said as he held a fork up and brought it close to his eye. "What's it matter?" Brain demanded. "That's my business. Your business is buying and selling." "Well, I'm selling, so are you buying or what?" Brain demanded. The drumming of his fingers on the counter stopped and his hand went flat enough, fast enough, to give the sound of a slap that left the rat-faced shopkeep briefly startled. "Listen, I don't much care for your attitude. Yeah, I'll buy, but it won't be true value. I gotta move this stuff, you know, and then sold, eh? I gotta make a living here." The rat-faced man had a wheezy, nasally, whiny voice, his palms rubbed together with nervous energy, and Brain only stood silent to draw the uncomfortable moment out. When the beady-eyed man's gaze began to dart around, Brain finally spoke. "I need 2 horses, medicinal herb, a new sword, and enough money for the inn for the night. Can you do that or not? And I'd like some money left over." "Aha, well. Yes and no. I got herb, and I got 2 horses. Adventurer, his friends died, survivor sold the horses, got 'em at a good price. I'll sell 'em to you, deduct the price from these things. Didn't sell no sword though, and while I got 'em, I won't discount that. See, you'll have enough for the inn, but not much else after that. Maybe a few copper left." The rat-faced shopkeep's smile came and went and came again, his tongue darted in and out of his mouth to lick his lips like a lizard tongue. "So, what do you say, traveler? You can't sleep on these, and the next place you might sell 'em is days away at best, and you don't got more money for herb do you, or horses? It's this or nothing. You want or not?" The shopkeeper's smile spread out as Brain's silence stretched. "Fine. But where can I find good work, around here?" Brain leaned forward as he asked the question. "It's important that I find good work. I'll be gone very early, so I don't need much work. Just a bit." Well, if you're willin', big house, center of town. Mayor lives there, lots of money, lots of work, you know, and hard drinker." The shopkeeper answered, and then swept the flatware off the counter where it tumbled with a noisy clatter into an open basket on his side of the counter. "Great." Brain perked up. "Give me the herb, horses, and money for the inn, and I'll make sure to forget this conversation ever happened." He drew his hand away from the counter, and the rat-faced shopkeeper began to chuckle. "What the hell?" She frowned from where she stood. "Work, huh? Something about that all felt wrong, felt off." She rushed back to the inn, through the front door, and before the innkeeper could rise she said, "He's just behind me, he'll be here in just a few minutes." The innkeeper relaxed, a bright, cheery smile on his face. "Well then, go on back to your room for now." "The key?" she asked and held out her hand. "Oh, none of the locks work anyway," he chuckled, "just head on up." She's mouth dropped open, but he'd already stopped listening and paying attention to her. Instead he was heading toward a bar on the far side of the room. She didn't linger to see what he did there. She only hastened back to where Layali sat by herself with a false belief in her own safety. Volume 7 C64. She felt an unexpected sense of relief when she entered the room and found that Layali was still where she'd been left. The heart in Zesh's breast had quickened for a moment when she touched the rusted iron handle of the door, and began to slow as soon as the small girl came into view. So the locks don't work. Marvelous. What a place. Zesh thought, but covered her thoughts with words. Lie down on the bed, I'm going to remove your bandages, Zesh said, and Layali wordlessly obeyed. Zesh's fingers deftly undid the knot just above the girl's ankle which held the wrap in place, and with slow and steady care, after raising the injured leg in one hand, she began to unwind the blood-stained white cloth. How long till you leave me behind? Layali asked, looking up at her caretaker with luminous and fearful trembling pupils. Don't worry about it, Zesh said after a few more turns around the girl's leg. We're still a long way from our winter. Brain will kill your tormentor, and then you'll be put in a nice place and everything will be fine. Whether a nice place existed or not that would take her, Zesh had no idea, but it seemed like the right thing to say. No, he won't. He doesn't have a sword anymore. And it's all my fault. It's all he's got and I took it away from him. He can't fight without that. Layali began to whimper a little, and her little childish eyes filled with tears. He can't fight, can't kill Cerebrate. He can't fight in that tournament. He's traveled all this way and I ruined it. I didn't mean to. And I don't want to be left behind. She began to weep. Why are you even taking care of me if you're just going to get rid of me? The girl wept, her words, all over the place, her fears, scattered, but Zesh had to ask. How do you know about the sword? I tossed that away. Zesh replied, then corrected her, and I'm the one who messed it up, just so you know. Layali rubbed the snot from her little button nose and laughed. I might have known, you're bad at stuff. Lots of stuff. I saw where you tossed it. I thought it was funny Brain didn't sleep with his sword like he did every night, so I looked at it. And then I looked around. You didn't toss it far enough, saw what was left of it. Zesh's face turned red. Damn it. Her ears drooped a little. I heated up his sword to help seal your wound, but I went too far with it, and the damn thing just kept getting hotter. It was ruined. Brain was busy with you, so when he said just toss it away, I thought he meant literally. So I tossed it where I figured. But you did. Layali laughed in spite of herself, and then shut down, staring up at the ceiling while Zesh resumed the process of removing the bandage until it was gone and all her wounds were exposed again. Zesh lowered Layali's foot onto her thigh so that the young girl's leg was elevated, and looked over the many marks. The bleeding was gone and they were looking better. I don't know the answer to your question, Zesh said at last. I can't stay in this country anymore. I don't know where to go. I don't have a home anymore as far as I'm concerned. In a way, I'm just like you. Layali gave a long hard look at her. Nuh-uh. You're strong. Real strong. You can do whatever. Nobody can say no unless you let them. I'm the opposite. I can't say no unless people let me. Nobody wants to feed me. I go hungry. Nobody wants to protect me. I'll die. Cerebrate finds me again. Or someone like him. All I can do is cry. If nobody helps me. I don't want to die anymore. I don't want to be alone either. There's no nice place for kids nobody loves. I'm going to die out there, and lucky means it'll be quick. She went back to her quiet weeping. So why are you taking care of me if you're just gonna let that happen later anyway? I already took Brain's dream. Took away his sword. He'll buy another. Zesh answered, and snapped her mouth shut at the girl's dismayed expression. I saw a magic sword once. I was serving in my father's house. A merchant was visiting, super important man I guess, and he offered my father the chance to buy one. 12 platinum coins, Layali said, her face bitter and twisted. I can barely believe Brain didn't just get rid of me over the potion, let alone the sword. Layali pursed her lips, and Zesh only cocked her face slightly to one side. Potion? She asked. Layali pointed to her eye. When we met. He was gonna buy a horse then, he had plenty of money, Went out to rescue a priest. But we've got no horse, do we? So, he spent it all, or nearly all, on a healing potion for me. Maybe the priest found out I was a half-elf, or maybe potions just cost that much. But I've cost him a lot. Getting rid of me. It makes sense. It makes sense but I don't want to be left behind. She cut herself off, and said a swift, "Shh. Don't say anything. Please." Layali pled, and closed her eyes. Zesh's ears twitched. The steps out in the hall could have been anyone's, but then. No, the pace. That's how he walks. HMPF, I never thought about that before. The half-elf wanted to sigh at her own ignorance being removed yet again, but instead she focused her eyes on the girl lying on the bed pretending to be asleep. Brain entered the room and held out bandages and some cheap clay bottles sealed with white wax. I have what we need. Good. She's asleep. This stings and I'd hate to make it hurt. Zeshi nodded along. Yes, she was in pain, but exhausted, I guess. It was true enough at least. Good, now let me show you how to do this, Brain said, and began the slow process of instruction. Zeshi's nimble fingers fumbled a fair bit. Not so much, it doesn't do any good to overuse it on the same spot, you just want it to be over and just barely around the wound, we don't have to drown the bandage. Zeshi turned red-faced again and again as he taught her how to do field first aid without magic, and little by little her fingers fumbled less as they went along. And while they worked, Zeshi chose to address him on what Layali brought up. So, do you really plan on leaving her somewhere? Brain raised his eyes from Layali's face to look over at Zeshi, who was steadily massaging the injured muscle of Layali's legs to help it loosen up. What brought this on? I was just thinking, you and I both know you can't win at this tournament. Not with me there, so. Are you really okay with just dropping Layali in an orphanage somewhere? Zeshi asked, and Brain thought that over. I was actually hoping to find a family to foster her. There are former elven slaves in the northern part of the Kingdom of Nazarick. A lot of families there, they're dark elves rather than wood elves. But still. If I explain things, I'm sure someone would take her in. Brain suggested. Why not keep her with you? Zeshi asked, and tried to ignore Brain's sigh. Brain looked down at the sleeping girl, his thumb wavered a little, but he brushed aside a bit of stray golden hair to reveal the eye that had once been missing. Without looking at Zeshi, he spoke to her. I can't take care of a kid. I don't know the first thing about how to raise one. I've barely managed to keep this one from dying. Besides, I'm a human. The only thing she knows about human men is that they either don't care about her, or want to hurt her. She'd never want to stay. And more than that, I'm not a good man, Zeshi. She'd grow up on the road and learn nothing a girl should learn, by staying with me. I'll find somewhere good for her, a nice house, some good people who want a child, and I'll make sure she's safe. That's all I can do. Now drop it. Zeshi abided by his wishes, and didn't ask further. But she didn't move either. Nor did she forget what she'd overheard. Brain came and went from the room, bringing a meal, and saying, You two take the bed, I'll be fine on my bedroll on the floor. The half-elf didn't argue, and Layali did not break her act of pretending to be asleep. She's really good at that. Zeshi noted in the back of her mind, and did her best to copy the act when darkness set in, and waited for Brain to leave. He moved with silence that would have been the envy of almost any member of the Black Scripture, but it was no match for Zeshi's senses. Her ears twitched as she followed after him. The buildings of the town were not overly large, nothing compared to Ikari, but there were enough multi-story buildings for Zeshi to follow him with relative ease from a distance. Not a good man, he says. She thought while she watched him hop over the low wall to the mayor's estate. He's going to go and set more slaves free. Zeshi never had the best opinion of the idea of heroism for heroism's sake. Most members of the Black Scripture felt the same, but there were those, like Time Turner, who genuinely felt the need to protect the weak because they were weak. While her own views hadn't changed much, it was hard not to admire the conviction of action. And so, she followed him, though not within. And then it hit her. I haven't seen any elves in this town. No half-elves, no full elves. And if some of them were in that house? She jumped atop the roof of a building and stared into the darkness, watching through the glass as Brain began grabbing objects of silver and gold and throwing them into his magic pouch. cups, plates, flatware, small bowls. The estate had a multitude of windows to let in natural light, and she watched as he went from room to room, pilfering what he could cram into the pouch, until he seemed satisfied, and left the way he came. The whirlwind of emotions grabbed Zeshi harder than the tentacles had previously grabbed Layali, and she jumped down to where he stood, grabbed him by the throat before he realized she was there, and with a running start that lifted his legs from the very ground, she jumped beyond the low walls and through the night air. Zeski. What are you doing? Can't breathe, he gasped as he flailed in the dark until she landed with a thunderous crash to the ground well outside the town and slammed him bodily to the ground, knocking the wind from his lungs and sending him into a spasm of coughing and choking, unable to rise as she glared down at him. You're no rescuer. You're a common thief, she shouted down at him with her fists clenched and her body trembling with outrage. In a disconnected sort of way that reminded Brain of the moment of his defeat by Gazif Stranov years before, he was keenly aware of everything around him. And like that moment, he felt an unusual kind of calm, despite his coughing and choking as he struggled to rise, and spat out. Fuck you. Zeshi. Volume 7 C65. Fuck me? You're a common thief. You weren't there to rescue any elven slaves. Just to rob somebody. Zeshi landed a kick to Brain's side, rolling him a few feet before he came to a stop and rose to all fours. Yes. Fuck you. He grunted as he grabbed his side. I told you, didn't I? I'm not a good man. But fuck you for judging me for it. Who the fuck are you to turn those accusing eyes on me? I'm a common thief, fine. I've stolen lives and property, but you protected people who stole souls, so don't you dare look at me like that. He rose, shaking, to his feet and glared at her. The happy-go-lucky mirth was gone from his face. I do what I have to in order to survive. I hadn't planned on doing any stealing on this trip, but there were unexpected expenses, he said and rubbed his ribs. God damn, I think that's cracked, he mumbled as his fingers probed the place she'd struck. It hit Zeshi what he meant: food, medicine, lodging. The things we needed. I needed. So those forks and things. When did you even mean to? Were you actually going to release those slaves? Zeshi demanded, searching his face for the truth and doubting whether she could find it if he hid it, or see it even if he gave it. Of course not. I don't hate them, he gasped out. Fucking bitch. That hurt. What do you mean? Zeshi glowered at him, but a rising dread was seeping into her gut. I was going to keep this a secret. Never tell you. Never wanted to tell you since I've gotten to like you. But they're all dead or severely punished and returned to their masters, Brain gasped. His knees were buckling, but he held fast, wanting to stay up at least a little longer. No. They should have been able to get out easy. Sneaking out the front in the morning or... She protested, but when she saw the pity in his eyes, she said no more. Have you never learned how to put information together? Brain gasped in frustration. Okay, fine, I'll treat you like the stupid child you seem to be. What did Layali think you were when you first met? A slave catcher. Zeshi answered, a shiver of disgust passing through her bones when she said it. What do you think is the penalty for a slave killing their master, or for an elf killing a human at all? Brain demanded, his eyes boring into the black and white eyes of the half-elven idiot in front of him. I guess, death. She answered as her skin began to tingle. And what do you think people will believe when the slaves you broke the chains of are found gone, or even if they're not found gone, maybe they never left, what do you think will be said, huh? Brain felt his knees give out and he fell down hard against the ground, but his steady stare never left the half-elf. That they murdered them. She guessed. Or that your brother did. That he came back and killed 2 humans as revenge and broke the others out. You used superhuman abilities, nobody ever saw you, they assume his power awakened. And just whom will they call for that kind of event, you stupid girl? Brain spat blood into the grass, and fell forward, catching himself with one hand and holding his ribs with the other. Scriptures, she whispered. Which ones? To deal with an awakened king it? Brain demanded. The black. My unit. She answered. Her knees began to weaken and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Will those give a shit about mercy? Brain demanded, wiping bloody flecks from his lips and casting the red aside. No. No, they won't. They put down threats. And the slave catchers. She couldn't say more. But Brain couldn't. Brain did. They'll be out in force to catch the elves you let go in order to keep a rebellion from happening. Runaway slaves with human blood on their hands and an awakened king at leader. What a story that will be. They're all dead. I didn't, Zess, she whispered. I didn't want that. I wanted. He was my brother. They were hurting him. I didn't even know I had a brother. Then as soon as I did, I saw him being. I just acted. She could no longer see Brain's face, her eyes were far too blurry. I steal to survive. And I stole so we could get Layali out of here. I won't get to fight in that tournament. It'll take years to find a replacement sword on par with the one you destroyed. I'm okay with that. She doesn't know, she doesn't have to know. I'm just going to get her somewhere safe, murder Cerebrate, and put Layali somewhere where she can grow up, and then, he spat blood again, and it landed beneath Zesh's gaze. Then I can move on, I'll find a battlefield or something and get a cheap one, and build back up again. Sorry I'm such a disappointment, and I'm sorry about what happened. But I never said I was a hero, and if you'd just asked me for advice, I'd have told you what not to do. And now neither of us can undo a damn thing, Brain said. They might have made it. Zesh tried to protest. But Brain had had enough. Don't be naive. Haven't you wondered why we haven't seen any of them? Because they've already been caught or killed. Half-elf slave catchers are a copper for a dozen, a new one gets made every time a noble gets a gleam in his eye, and a place like Hikari, with their big latifundias and their large population. Yeah, they'll have hundreds of those either working there or operating independently. Everyone you tried to save. They're dead or wishing they were, being interrogated about your awakened brother unless he's already been caught and killed too. She said nothing more, she began to weep, worse than Layali had earlier, the totality of her complete and utter uselessness, and the depth of one betrayal after another came crashing down on her all at once. God damn it. Brain mouthed the word when he saw her fall apart in the moonlight, and he was reminded of something he'd forgotten. Because of her ace, and perhaps in part because of her sheltered life, she was the equivalent of a human 15 or 16-year-old girl, a child in her own right, with everything that came with it. Parentless, controlled, and utterly lost. Great. Now look at what you've done. He told himself, and, though he was sore and bitter about her earlier judgment still, he had to wonder if he'd gone too far. With that in mind, he approached, inching himself closer to her, and when she all but fell forward, he caught her, and embraced her as he would have Layali. You didn't mean any harm. And I'm sorry I disappointed you. I'm not what you thought I was, but that's not your fault. You didn't know any better. Nobody taught you any better, any different. He said that, and many other things as he tried to reassure her. He wasn't sure how much good it would do, knowing that her comrades would be hunting down her brother, if he was even still alive. And that everything she tried to do had come to naught. But Brain did his best, staying with her and stroking her back until the crying finally stopped. Volume 7 C66. She took a long time to settle down, and Brain had to wonder how many martial arts she used, when he looked back and saw how distant the town was, after worrying briefly that something or someone might interrupt them there with the racket she made. But settle down she did, and when she did, she disentangled herself from his embrace with only the softest touch to avoid injuring him again. Are you all right? She asked when she saw him wince. Brain gasped when she spoke after touching his ribs. I think you broke some bones, but nothing that won't be cured by a few weeks of an herbal wrap, or a potion, or a spell. But I can't pay for those other things until I sell off my findings at the next town. I'll be sore for a few days at least, but it's nothing I can't handle. I've been through worse. Don't worry about it. He croaked out and then sat back on his heels. So, now what happens? Are you leaving? Are you going to turn me in, report me for the murder of those guards? What? Brain asked and rested his now free hands on his thighs while she sat on her heels in turn. I'll just get lost again. Mess things up. By the gods, I'm so stupid. Like you said, I'm a stupid girl. I don't know what I'm doing or what's real anymore. Nothing is what I thought and everything's all messed up. She looked to and fro, then lowered her eyes to the blood-stained grass. I shouldn't have said it that way, I'm sorry, really. You're naive, innocent, You never could have known what was going to happen. Brain offered consolation, and his arm twitched as if to raise it and touch her again, then he thought better of it and kept it still. You're not stupid, he groused, you're just naive and you meant well. You know better now, and won't make that mistake again. You'd be stupid if you repeated it. And who knows? Maybe by some dumb luck if you got away? Brain tried to offer a smile, but it died after a twitch of his lips. I hope so. She replied with a glum voice and a frown, but at least tell me one thing. What? Brain asked. Tell me your real story. She asked of him and Brain couldn't help but laugh. I think I said, I was a peasant with talent, that's all. I found a sword, won a fight, left home and never looked back. Brain's smirk formed all on its own. There's no tragic backstory of a bandit attack and my power awakening. There's no hero tutor who guided me and died saving my life. I picked up the sword and was better than everyone. The only thing to happen that was bad was one defeat at the hands of Kaziv Stranov. I set out to surpass him. Joined a group of bandits that tried to rob me, took charge, and for a few years? He asked the question rhetorically and snapped the fingers of his right hand. Things were great. We targeted nobles and wealthy travelers, and spent money in villages that kept them real cooperative for a good long time. They even sheltered us a time or two, hiding us when patrols came looking. We did so well that the Six Arms made overtures to us. Then they were wiped out and I buggered the hell out of there. Brain explained and then said with a little winsome smile, I told you, Zeshi. I'm not a good man, I'm a robber, a thief, and as you saw with those guards, a murderer. I just have standards is all. I rejected the Six Arms, and it might have come to a fight, but after they were destroyed, I ran for it alone. You ran? Zeshi asked. She struggled to wrap her head around that, looking him up and down as if seeing him for the first time. Yes, whoever killed Six Arms was far too strong. The bandits I was with chose not to go with me, and I'm pretty sure they're all dead now. It turned out that the Six Arms was wiped out by Moman the Black and Lupu the red-haired beauty. There's no point in losing a fight, and I was no match for that, so I made the right call. Brain explained, but to that Zeshi had to ask. Who are those? The strongest man and woman team in the world. Look, I only heard a few of their feats, but when we get over the border to the kingdom of Kani, ask about them. They're very popular out that way. So, anyway, I've just been on the move ever since. I made a living with my sword when I could, and stole to stay alive when I couldn't. It isn't that I like stealing, I just have no other skill. I can fight, and fight. Oh, and also fight. Did I mention fighting? He asked, cocking his head and giving her a wink. She let out a stupid laugh that at least temporarily erased her drawn and sorrowful look. And when her amusement died, his little sly smile did too. So that's it, wandering ever since, on my own, like always, he said, till Layali, and then you. No comrades? Ever? She asked. None who stayed alive. Brain replied, some were glory-hungry fools, and some just died heroes, and some became enemies, which has the same end. Either way, it's easier if you don't get attached. So, that's why you're leaving Layali somewhere? So you don't get attached to her? That's why you haven't asked me to stay when this trip is done, even though I have nowhere else to go either? She asked. Her eyes were so big and innocent that Brain could barely believe she was the one who said all that. Okay, so maybe she stumbled into the right conclusion. Brain thought, but he chose not to say anything against it. Though it did briefly cause his heart to freeze in his chest. Instead he gave a phony sigh and just said, it's what's best, I've got nothing I can offer, and by the time we get there you'll be fine on your own and know all you need to. Just let that go for now. The point is, I mean, you asked about me, that there is no point. You want to know what kind of person I really am? I'm a selfish swordsman and that's the end of it. Now you haven't answered me yet, Brain demanded, and Zeshi was quiet. I won't say anything. Nobody in this country would listen to a half-breed anyway. Just, no more of it, alright? For the rest of the journey to our winter, no stealing. Zeshi asked, and Brain frowned a little. What I stole won't last long. He pointed out. I know, but it won't need to. Zeshi promised, and when Brain opened his mouth to object, she leaned forward and put a finger to his lips. Hush. Just let me do something that I can't mess up. Brain nodded, His lips rose and fell in the groove of her finger and he uttered a muffled, "Fine. Now let's get back. Layali is all alone. What if she wakes up and we're not there?" Zesh's smirk was a source of confusion when she dropped her hand away and stood up. She held out her hand and when he took it, she helped him to his feet. "Race you back? With broken ribs?" he asked. "Don't run on them," she suggested with a playful shrug. He took off running in response, and Zeshi followed hot on his heels.